What are the Duergar? Why are they considered to be so dangerous? And how has this myth evolved over time? Hi everybody and welcome to Beasts of the Old World, a channel that delves deep into ancient folklore and mythical creatures from across the globe. My name is Nick and today we're looking at the dark dwarves of Northumberland, the fearsome Duergar. In the shadowy hills of Northumberland, somewhere out upon the misty moors and high up among the rocky crags, something lurks. Dark, solitary dwarves who can appear and disappear at will. These are not like Tolkien's subterranean gold diggers, nor are they like their namesakes in Norse mythology. These are the Northumbrian Duergar, an evil race of dwarves whose malice for mankind knows no bounds. But what exactly are they? Sometimes known as the Simonside dwarves, the Duergar were known to haunt the moorlands and heathlands and the craggy hilltops of Northumberland. Descriptions of them paint them as broad, stout figures, shorter than men, but far, far stronger. But don't let their height fool you, for this belies their menace. The Duergar are as cold and calculating as the stone they emerge from. Cloaked in lambskin and moleskin, wearing hats made of moss, they do not look nearly half as evil as what they really are. They delight in leading unsuspecting travellers into dangerous bogs, using the light of the torches they carry as a lure. In this sense, they bear a resemblance to will-o'-the-wisps and numerous other fey creatures. Leading people astray is, of course, a common behavioural trope of the fey, but the Duergar stand out from the crowd a little here. Unlike will-o'-the-wisps, the Duergar have a clear physical form and, as we will see later, have other ways of tricking people and bringing them to harm. Further, where some fey are satisfied with tricks and mischief, this is not enough for the Duergar, who will bring mortals to great harm, or even death, if they can, especially after dark. Indeed, Catherine Briggs tells us that they are regarded as the worst and most malicious order of fairies. So what is it that makes them so dangerous? The Duergar are solitary creatures, seemingly tethered to the land they haunt. They aren't just tricksters, they see themselves as guardians of their domains, and are fiercely protective of the hills, moors and wild spaces they occupy. They are notorious for their animosity towards humans, and it would be fair to say that in many ways they are defined by their malice and their cunning. Stories from the hills of Northumberland often tell of travellers lured astray by a flickering light, a mock fire that seems to offer shelter, only to lead the unsuspecting wanderer straight into the deep ravines or into the bogs known locally as moss hags. These treacherous landscapes are the Duergar's domain, and they take a cruel delight in watching humans stumble into their traps. Unlike other trickster figures in folklore, the Duergar's tricks often end in death, with their victims lost to the moors forever. These creatures are an integral part of the Unseelie Court, where the most dangerous of fairies reside. This is a group of fey creatures who are inherently hostile to humankind, creatures that delight in suffering, trickery and misfortune, that revel in chaos and fear, and that do not hesitate to cause harm. The Duergar, as members of this court, are bound by its dark nature. Their hostility towards humans is not simply personal, it is ingrained in their very essence. Unlike the members of the Unseelie Court, who may offer aid or protection to those who treat them with respect, the Duergar offer nothing but harm. One of the most terrifying aspects of the Duergar is their supernatural strength and unearthly resilience. This strength, combined with their cunning and territorial nature, makes them very dangerous indeed. It also seems that they can both appear and vanish at will, slipping away like phantoms. Worse still, when their tricks fail, they may resort to more traditional methods, chasing down their victims and beating them to death with the clubs they carry. Stories of them are few and far between, but one tale highlights the cunning means by which a Duergar may seek to bring about your untimely demise.
It was in the gloaming that he found himself wandering alone upon the hills. These hills were almost pathless, and in the dark he had strayed from the faint trail he'd been following, and now he knew not where he was. The sun had gone, and though there was still light in the sky, the ground was dark and grey, the shadows deep. Beneath him he could see the mist creeping up from the valley. Soon it would overcome him, and then he would never find his way. Not a soul in sight, not a whisper of wind to guide him. The stranger, cold and weary, knew he'd never make it to Rothbury that night, so he resolved to shelter under the first suitable rock he could find, for his heart was now heavy with fear and exhaustion. In the darkness ahead he saw the shadow of a large rock that might suit his needs, and made towards it. As the fog overtook him, a flicker caught his eye. From out of the rock there came a pale, trembling light, distant and flickering like a wisp of flame in the wind. He stumbled through the shifting mists, and as he approached, he found that it was near just a rock. There were light coming from a small, rough hut made of stones, like the sort what shepherds built for shelter. A small fire burned inside, its flames weak but steady, casting strange shadows upon the walls. He breathed a sigh of relief, and without a second thought he stepped inside, grateful to find warmth, however meagre it might have been, for out there he knew he might well have died of exposure before morning. He studied the small hut. Either side of the fire was sat 2 stones, to the right of which lay a pile of kindling, and to the left 2 great logs. He sank down onto one of the stones and held his hands to the fire. After a while the fire began to weaken, and so he took a little kindling and fed the flame. The fire blazed a little higher, and oh, it felt so good, better than he'd ever remembered to feel warmth again after the chill of the hilltops. But just as he'd begun to relax, the door burst open, and in walked a figure so strange, so out of place, that it made his heart skip a beat. A dwarf, no higher than the traveller's knee, but with shoulders so broad and a frame so thick and stocky, it was clear at a glance the little man was mighty strong. His face was twisted in a scowl, and his eyes narrowed as he glared at the stranger. He wore a coat of lambskin, while his trousers and shoes were made of moleskin, and atop his head a moss-covered hat decorated with a single pheasant's feather. The dwarf stumped past the traveller, made over to the stone opposite, and sat down with a heavy thud. It did not speak a word, but stared at the traveller with cold disdain, never taking his eyes off him. The fire crackled, and the stranger, uneasy, dared not speak first. He knew well enough what this creature was. This was no kindly spirit, but a Duergar, one of the black dwarves of the hills, terribly fierce and hostile to men, and well known for leading the lost to their doom. They sat in silence, the only sound the crackling of the weakening fire as the cold settled deep into their bones. As the flames began to die, the traveller shivered. At last he could bear it no longer, and added another handful of kindling to the dwindling flames, desperate to keep the fire alive. When he did so, the dwarf's gaze intensified, and the traveller could feel the malice seeping out of him. The Duergar leaned back slowly and picked up one of the heavy logs that lay by the fire. It was fully twice as long as he was and thicker than his own body, yet the Duergar broke it across his knee like it were nothing more than matchwood. Throwing the logs on the fire, the Duergar looked between the man and the remaining log, and then looked back again as if to say, "How about that then, can't you do the same?" The fire flared bright for a time, though the traveller was growing to be so concerned about what this dwarf might do to him that he could not enjoy its heat. After a time, the flames waned once more, the heat slipping away as the wood burned through. The traveller watched the Duergar, knowing there was no more kindling left, and the dwarf only stared, before finally looking at the last log again, challenging the traveller to add it to the fire to feed the flames. The traveller was now bitterly cold and wanted desperately to do so, but he hesitated, his mind whispering that some trap was about to spring. And so the silence stretched on, and they sat there, the two of them, as the flames sputtered and dwindled away. At length the fire was extinguished, and the warmth utterly gone, and the hut was plunged into darkness. Only the dull glint of the dwarf's black eyes could be seen in the shadows. The traveller dared not move an inch. He stayed like that, stiff as a board for what seemed like hours, until, in the distance, a cockerel crew, and the thin light of the morning crept into the hut. As it did so, the Duergar vanished, and with him the hut and the fire vanished too. All that remained was the stone on which the traveller was sat. He looked around, and as he did so the ground beneath him crumbled away, for this was the Duergar's illusion too. He saw now that he was perched high upon a jagged crag. Where the hearth had been, there was a deep ravine yawning below him. He sat there, gawping into the abyss, the mist swirling around his legs. If he'd taken the dwarf's challenge and picked up the log to feed the fire, he would have tumbled into the abyss, never to be seen again. All that was left of him would have been a pile of broken bones, lost forever in the darkness.
The Duergar don't appear in other branches of English folklore, seemingly tied fairly exclusively to the hills of Northumberland, a once wild, untamed land, dangerous to traverse. But as we look at how the Duergar have evolved over the years, it's clear that their transformation is not just a matter of folklore adapting to new tastes or the passage of time. It also reflects shifts in how societies viewed nature, the supernatural, and their relationship to both. The Duergar in their earliest forms come from within the Norse tradition. In ancient Norse mythology, dwarves, known as Duergar, were not inherently malevolent, but were beings of great skill and craftsmanship. They forged some of the most powerful items in the Norse mythological universe, Thor's hammer Mjolnir for instance, and the golden ring Anvaranort. The Norse dwarves played important roles in the world's creation and maintenance. Yet the Northumbrian Duergar, while originally inspired by these same Norse dwarves, took on a darker, more sinister role. But why? This transformation is possibly linked to the unique cultural and historical forces of the region. Northumberland, located in a borderland between England and Scotland, was once a place of constant conflict, which may account for why so many of its mythical creatures have such a violent nature. Further, due to its relative proximity to Scandinavia, it was here that invading Viking forces would often make landfall. Northumberland was therefore part of the Danelaw, a region in England that was under Viking control after their invasions began in the 8th century. The Vikings had a lasting influence on the region's culture, language and mythology, and this influence would have contributed to the creation and perpetuation of much of the region's folklore, including figures like the Duergar. Perhaps it should be no surprise then that in a landscape as rugged and unforgiving as Northumberland's, where travellers often fell prey to the many dangers of the crags and bogs there, that the supernatural creatures associated with it were imagined as dwarves. Norse Duergar had always been associated with the earth, but given how treacherous the regional landscape was, it's not difficult to imagine how they came to be seen in Northumberland as actively hostile towards humans. Perhaps a creature whose behaviours in many ways are so similar to will-o'-the-wisps may not have been imagined as a dwarf if the Viking influence here had not been as strong. However it happened, the Duergar's role in folklore shifted from one of cunning craftsmanship to one of malicious deception, leading travellers into danger with their flickering lights or chasing them out of their domains while wielding wicked clubs. We even hear of them tearing their victims limb from limb or cursing them with ill health. A story of an encounter with the Duergar is retold in Westwood and Simpson's Lore of the Land, in which a young man out hunting is confronted by a Duergar while he takes a drink at a nearby burn or stream. The young hunter apologises for his incursion into the dwarf's domain and offers him the game he had killed. However, the dwarf refuses, explaining that the wild game are his subjects and that he never fails to avenge their deaths. When the dwarf has finished warning the young hunter never to hunt game on his lands again, he asks him to follow, and just as the young hunter is about to cross the burn to do so, his companion calls him. The young hunter turns to call back, and when he looks again he finds the dwarf has vanished into thin air. The story goes on to say that
had he crossed the burn, the dwarf would certainly have torn him to pieces. As it was, he was foolish enough not to heed the dwarf's warning and resumed shooting on his way home. Soon afterward, he fell sick and died within the year.
the Duergar, in their trickery and hostility, reflect the once chaotic and dangerous nature of the Northumbrian countryside, a land that can easily deceive the unwary. This was a time when the natural world was viewed not primarily as a resource to be tamed, but as a threatening and unpredictable force, and the Duergar embodied that fear. With their dark, mischievous nature and ties to the deep places of the world, the once cunning craftsmen of Norse mythology were redefined as dark, treacherous entities who led humans astray, serving the forces of chaos and darkness. Fast forward to the 20th century, and we see yet another shift. This is where we begin to see the profound influence of Tolkien's depiction of dwarves, which borrows heavily from Norse mythology while taking it in a slightly different direction. In The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien's dwarves are not the dark, trickster figures of the Duergar tradition. Though flawed by their love for wealth bordering on greed, they are generally depicted as skilled craftsmen who live in tight-knit communities and are well known for their prowess in battle. While they share the Duergar's link to the earth and their tendency for isolation, often retreating to their mountain homes to hoard treasure, Tolkien's dwarves embody qualities of courage and resilience, as opposed to fear and malice. This shift may reflect Tolkien's own cultural values. As a scholar of Anglo-Saxon who also endured the horrors of war, he was well acquainted with the value of perseverance, community, and the need for an enduring connection to history and tradition, especially as the world around him was changing so rapidly. In a broader sense, where once the landscape had been something to be afraid of, by the early 20th century, the world had become a smaller place, easier to navigate. Cities were growing and growing, and the countryside was quickly beginning to shrink. Increasingly, roads were lit at night, and attitudes to the landscape and travel through it after dark therefore changed. Northumbrian Duergar come from a time and place in which the natural landscape was seen as dangerous and unpredictable, where the earth, while it was something to be respected and worshipped, was also to be feared. The Duergar were the embodiment of the land's dangers, and a potent warning for travellers not to brave the hills at night. Today they are a reminder of a time when the world was seen as being filled with untamed forces that mere mortals could never fully control. They remind us that even today, venturing out into the hills without being properly prepared is a very bad idea indeed. The hills and crags are an unforgiving place, one where you must think hard about your every move, one where the wrong decision could mean the end of you. So if you're ever sheltering from the elements in a stone hut on a misty night and are joined by a grumpy-looking man in a sheepskin coat, whatever you do, don't put that last log on the fire.